A big shout out for the art in this video goes to Ganondoodles. Ruins, the remnants of the people who lived long before we were born, and which civilization was destroyed before being slowly taken back by nature. This cycle is very much tied to a very significant location with history found in BotW, ranging from divine ruins, Zonai ruins, Gerudo ruins, to more modern ruins caused by the calamity 100 years ago. So be sure to leave a like, subscribe as it helps so much, to not miss out on any other theories like this one.
The classical people from the Era of Goddess Hylia. We begin with the first known human civilization in the Zelda series, the one that grew prosperous under the rule of Goddess Hylia in the first known era after the Era of Creation, when the Triforce was under the protection of Goddess Hylia and she resided in her own realm, where the people surrounding her worshipped her statue and on occasion bowed while she was sitting in her throne. The reason to believe so is that in Skyward Sword, the sealed temple's original name until the demon invasion was the Temple of Hylia. Meaning that in Skyward Sword we explored the holiest of holy of the first human civilization, / Roman-inspired ruins found in Tabantha on the border between Hebra and central Hyrule suggest that this civilization existed for a long time, building numerous temples and springs to show gratitude to their goddess.
Much like the Greeks built temples to their most important gods on hills above cities, Acropolis, or in English High City, the cult of Hylia seems to have a similar origin in BotW, as the ancient columns are placed in what appears to be an Acropolis of the Tabantha area of Hebra. These column and pillar ruins in Hebra, but also south in Akkala, suggest that the humans before or right after Skyward Sword lived in the northern half of Hyrule, and had a culture and architecture very similar to the one found in ancient Greece and later Rome. The number of these ruins and concentration of them in BotW's Hebra and Akkala suggest that this civilization existed for a long time. So long indeed that their most important structures still have fragments standing to this day, including at Lanayru Promenade up to the Spring of Courage at Mount Lanayru in Necluda. All of these structures were built by people before the civilization came to an abrupt end, and the Hylians abandoned sophisticated ancient arts for half-timbered and simple stone architecture. To the Hylians living until the Great Calamity, these ancient people were much like the ancient Greeks and Romans to us. Recognizable and developed civilizations, but still massive mysteries that they know little about outside their architecture, a religion which continues to this day based on all the Goddess Hylia statues found in BotW, including the one that is believed to be the goddess statue from the Era of Goddess Hylia, and Era of the Sky at the Forgotten Temple. Then you have the goddess statues at the Sacred Springs, and the much younger than these ancient statues found in the Temple of Time and the small shrines of Hylia in each of Hyrule's settlements. In other words, the ancient ruins in BotW are our closest connection to the first humans and their civilization, which with the exception of the founders of Skyloft, were wiped out by the invading demons. So next time you pass next to the ancient columns, Torin Wetland and Lanayru Promenade, stop and show respect to the people who were humans, not Hylians, who built these structures in the earliest of times. Which brings us to the other example and people with ruins from times unknown, namely the Zonai and their ruins from times unknown, which are primarily found in northern and southern parts of Hyrule. The lost Zonai people are the greatest mystery and secret until at least late 2022, but their exclusively built out of stone structures are far better preserved than the much older ancient Hylian ruins complete with bridges, statues, and so on. Behavior-wise, they might have been a far more brutal people and civilization, which at the same time contained a well-developed civilization with roads, heavily detailed bridges, and multiple settlements, which hints that the Zonai did trade with other people. Specifically in two cases, Zonai ruins all the way up to the Spring of Courage and the even more mysterious Typhloid ruins. Well, that and religious sites, all dedicated to the guardian deity, the spirit dragon Farosh, an extension the golden goddess of life and courage Faror, the goddess who also gave the name to the province that the Zonai barbarians most likely originated from, Faron. At the same time, it is clear that the Zonai also worshipped or at the very least respected the two other golden goddesses, as we find statues from times unknown depicting boars, the spirit animal of Din, the goddess of power, and the owl, the spirit animal of Nehru, the goddess of wisdom. Seriously, do you really think that a civilization that builds structures like these, lines their roads with massive statues and beautifully carved bridges out of stone were primitive beings? No, they were just a serious rival to the Hylians, who throughout their history have been obsessed with staying on top, subduing anyone who might have the intelligence or strength to challenge them. Apparently, the Zonai might have had both until the collapse of their civilization. Their barbarian armor, which the Ancient Sheikah deliberately hid among the 3 Lame labyrinths, details the warrior culture of the lost tribe of Farron, a people who were likely taught from father to son to fight with great courage to protect their mothers and sisters from the big expansive threat from the north. Thus, the Farron barbarians were a people which the Hylians often ended up in conflicts with, but couldn't defeat for the longest of time. Though they were not around during the ancient humans when Hylia was still alive, and instead probably showed up long after the end of the timeline of the Zelda games preceding Breath of the Wild, yes, we managed to jump from the very beginning to what is between the end of the 3 branches and Breath of the Wild. And fittingly enough, as the Zonai likely had a rich history, but all that is left of that former greatness are a few ruins.
The Gerudo warriors of the desert and highlands from times unknown to ancient times. A tribe of humans which might have split up from the Hylians as soon as the Skyloftians returned to the surface and were thus, despite their female-dominated society, a serious contender which eventually got into 2 wars with the Hylians. The Hyrulean Civil War and the Gerudo-Hylian War, both eventually lost, but which showed the strength of the Gerudo and resulted in the eventual expulsion of the tribe and humiliation of their king Ganondoodles. Allowed to return sometime after the Twilight Crisis, the Gerudo became loyal subjects of the Kingdom of Hyrule, getting close to the royal family, and partaking in their wars to adjust the reputation that Ganondorf had ruined. Gerudo of the Era of the Wild are for the most part peaceful, but ready to fight at a moment's notice as evidenced by the statues found in the Gerudo Desert. Erected long after the Arbiter's Ground's final use during the Era of Twilight, they are for the most part still standing, proud, unlike the former prison. Which gives us a good time frame and the role of the Gerudo after 4 Swords adventures, as warrior swordswomen just as depicted by each of the statues, likely serving as professional mercenaries for the Kingdom of Hyrule. They achieved success and wealth which brought them out of tents and into walled towns. The ancient Gerudo are a mystery, which defied the odds in the desert and turned their main seat into a paradise like no other in Gerudo history. Battle-hardened warriors who definitely would not end up in so many troubles as the Gerudo in the Era of the Wild get into. But who knows, since Gerudo Town might not have been the first settlement in that area based upon the west, north, and east Gerudo ruins. The Gerudo as people though were lucky as they survived thanks to their undying loyalty and friendship to the royal family of Hyrule, a development in their civilization which allowed them to maintain their warrior history and culture, while, for the most part, adapting to the world surrounding them, especially after the first calamity had been halted. But after which, the still militaristic Gerudo might have taken part in the persecution of the Sheikah, and thus brought the Yiga problem to their own backyard. Speaking of,
the Ancient Sheikah who lived in Hyrule Castle Town, Necluda, and possibly a few other places, until they were kicked out and their settlements destroyed. Despite meeting the ancient monks in the ancient trial shrines, the Trial of the Sword and the Final Trial, there's little we know about the Ancient Sheikah and the civilization which reached their peak 10,000 years ago. Yes, the ancient tapestry and the 2 seconds dedicated to its section in Breath of the Wild shows a glimpse of the civilization and the development of the Sheikah shrines and the Sheikah slate. But even there, we don't see the faces of these Sheikah, who are preparing Plan B for when Plan A of stopping Calamity Ganon with the Divine Beasts and Guardians would fail. The betrayal of the King of Hyrule of the Sheikah and the persecution of them was so total that everything of the civilization, except the entrances to the underground or if you prefer iceberg-shaped shrines of trials, were lost. Thus, we know nothing of the high-tech clothing and weaponry the Sheikah could have worn. Yes, we have Robbie who wears tech glasses, but even these are just wannabe Ancient Sheikah robes. We don't know Ancient Sheikah fashion and culture apart from the military tactics as the ninja assassins of the royal family of Hyrule and a weakness for bananas. But even those don't show us how the Ancient Sheikah lived. The best example I can probably give is a modern high-tech society dependent on electricity, living right next to people without electricity, low literacy rate, and simple military weapons who only dominate because of their numbers and the divine royal family which the Ancient Sheikah served unconditionally due to the pact with Goddess Hylia, when the Hylians were simple humans before their refuge to Skyloft. Now, there are theories that the medieval Sheikah we see in Ocarina of Time and Twilight Princess might have not survived long after the Hero of Time, and instead, just like Rinkudo suggested, the Sheikah and Yiga we meet in Breath of the Wild are descendants of Ancient Sheikah who time travel from before Skyward Sword to a point before 10,000 years prior to Breath of the Wild. bringing technology with them from a time when the Sheikah still utilized the power of timeshift stones, or space-time stones, as it is in Japanese, in the Lanayru province, as obviously the ancient Sheikah also had a second deity next to Hylia, Nehru, the goddess of wisdom. The time-traveling Sheikah would also bring their culture and perhaps even reintroduce the culture of Hylia to the Hylians, just as it used to be when they were humans, not even Skyloftians and definitely not Hylians. The sophisticated ancient Sheikah families with the customs from the times of Hylia, from the times of their own ancient ruins, might have created great resentment towards the highly intelligent and advanced ancient Sheikah men, women and children. Since why else were they called Ancient Sheikah? As they simply wrote themselves out of the timeline prior to the one that leads up to Breath of the Wild. Hence they have a much closer link to their ancestors from the times of Hylia, and this might have created resentment from the royal family, which could have felt threatened by the people who lived next to the classical ancient Hylians, or if you prefer humans, from before the first demon invasion. Thus, they saw only strength in the numbers to force the direct advanced and dangerous descendants of time travelers to live primitive lives as farmers, unable to challenge the divine blood and their appointed elites.
Urban Hylian citizen found in central Hyrule until the last calamity. In Age of Calamity we meet no civilians, meaning that we will most likely never see how the town and suburb dwelling Hylian lived prior to the calamity 100 years ago. We just see their military, and let's say that compared to ancient Sheikah weaponry, they don't have much firepower, as these cannons got nothing on these cannons. It was simply a late medieval society. We know the Hylian peasant thanks to Hateno village, but the only indication of the Hylian urban civilian derives from creating a champion. And even that concept art of Castletown's central square only has colorless silhouettes, which does not tell us much about the Hylian non-military urban men, women, and children and their culture, which perished during the calamity, their fashion, interests, and daily lives. Interestingly though, creating a champion in its introduction page to Hylians shows a wide variety which wasn't present in the game, including this guy, wearing clothing which is taken straight out of our own 1800s. Now, it could be that this was just a scrapped concept, as neither Breath of the Wild or Age of Calamity had traces of this type of clothing, and both games showed Hyrule Castletown as a typical late medieval / early Renaissance capital. Thus, this gentleman would fit a Castletown more like from this fan drawing, much like this concept of a Kokiri champion also found in Creating a Champion.
It might also derive from a point in development when the Koroks were still planned as Kokiri, just like in Ocarina of Time and the Spirit of Fado in the Wind Waker, and the Zelda team was considering a miniature Minish Picori-like village with miniature people. But other than those likely scrapped concepts, the Zelda team included ruins pointing to a secret or mysterious people, and civilizations which are long gone, or at the very least, not what it used to be. And that covers our timeline journey across the people of Hyrule, which we haven't really seen within the Zelda games, only the bloodline descendants who only can feel a connection to their ancestors through tapestries and the many ruins scattered across Hyrule. And in the case of the Colosseum ruins, or Colosseum in Age of Calamity Guardian of Remembrance, ushering a Hylian renaissance of classical arts. Much like the Sheikah rediscovered ancient technology and science over 100 years ago. Write what you think about all of these in the comments down below, and if you haven't already, then press that like button to make this video more visible and make me very happy by subscribing to the channel and pressing that notification bell, and again for all notifications. Finally, a big thanks goes to all our patreon.com/commonrealm patrons, and in particular royal producer Charles Shash. You rock, and please enjoy one or both of these two awesome videos.